Hey Jared, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. What I want to do is catch up and talk with you about state of the church, state of discipleship. But jumping into that discussion, I think it would be really valuable for you to share with us all who you are and what you do, and why is this topic even important to you. So, floor is yours.
Absolutely. I'm one of the directors at the Church Multiplication Network, which is the church planting arm of the Assemblies of God. And previously a church planter, multi-site pastor, invited to the table to help in different areas with the Church Multiplication Network. And then recently I've taken over the training that we do on the field. So anything to do with our church plant training or multiplication training, I oversee that and kind of pull together some of our best planters and pastors across the country to train people that are putting their toe in the water or taking the lead.
All right. Man, I love it. I love what you guys are doing. I ran into you. I'm sure you don't remember because you run into people every single conference. But when I heard about the rural church planting opportunity, it just really sparked my interest. Particularly because the first time that I heard about rural was maybe like 7 years ago at the Potomac Network conference. And they had said that there was going to be this massive shortage, like 30,000 pastors, of a shortage within the next, I don't remember if it was like 5 or 10 years. But maybe you can kind of give me a little bit of the landscape on like, where are we in the terms of state of the church and rural context alone? I know something that's important to you.
Yeah. I probably am a little bit more familiar what it looks like, at least within the Assemblies of God vein or lane. But we see a lot of incredible men and women who have pastored in rural contexts, and they're aging out. They're entering into retirement. They maybe didn't think through maybe a succession plan, or they've gotten sick, or the town has declined. So there's been a lot of different things that have affected the rural church context. But I also think COVID and that whole era also shifted some things. We saw a rural remigration taking place where people were going back into rural places and spaces. And honestly, I don't know if we had a significant enough churches that were ready to handle these younger families coming back into those contexts. But, I grew up in Western South Dakota where there's more cows than people. And the thing I love about the rural context is you don't just get the opportunity to pastor a congregation, you get a chance to pastor the entire community. As you build trust and relationship, there's incredible favor that comes into a small town context. And over 60% of, about 63% of our nation is considered rural. Within our denomination, about 43% of our churches are in a rural context. And so there's incredible opportunity as we look to raise up leaders, hopefully for the next generation in those areas.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So maybe going back now, like kind of on a high level, I'm a little bit of a data nerd, and I'm looking at all the data. From discipleship, we see that the majority of churches have no discipleship pathway, at least, of high intention, helping people go from, hey, I'm new to becoming a disciple maker, or from, new believer to disciple maker. Then also looking at state of the church from a high level, my understanding now, and I've heard different stats, but is we've now flipped to where we're closing more churches than we're opening. And we're seeing, by and large, across all denominations, when you look at it, across a major decline around Christianity in the United States. One of the reasons I want to reach out to you was because with CMN, I see there's so much church planting growth happening, and you guys are seeing a lot of church growth. And like you mentioned, you guys are with the Assemblies of God largely. So I wanted to hear your perspective then on what do you see as far as state of the church nationally, across like Big C church. And then also, what do you guys see as far as church growth? And is there hope? And are you guys seeing opportunity? I want to hear your heart, your perspective on state of the church for our country, and then also what you guys are experiencing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me say this about our movement first. So within the Assemblies of God, we were on a 5-year decline. In other words, we were planting less than we were closing. We saw that for 5 years. For the end of 2024, it's the first year that we've paused that trend. We planted 330 churches across our movement last year for 2024, and we closed less than that. So it was the first time that the number planted was higher than the number closed.
Yeah.
That we celebrated that. That was a big win for us.
Yeah.
Now, I say carefully that we paused the trend.
Yeah.
We have a lot of work to do to maintain that direction now. But it's exciting for us to be able to see that that's actually happening.
Yeah.
When I look at the church as a whole across the country, I mean, I know that a lot of denominations are struggling in different areas. There's pockets where God is just moving in miraculous ways. And I think in general, what we have probably missed the boat on is we haven't done a great job of issuing the call to the pastorate, to ministry, whether it's full-time vocational or it's volunteer or it's co-vocational. I do think we're coming back to that again, where we're issuing the call once again to people that might be called to be a shepherd in a town, you know?
Yeah.
And I think we have a gap of leadership because we failed to issue the call for a while, for a season. But I think we're coming back to that again, which gives me hope that we can see some people raised up to take these pulpits as they might empty out, or healthy churches taking on that unhealthy church down the road and bringing it back to life.
How would you describe that call, that invitation that we've missed for so long, that's kind of created this void? What would you, like, if there was a pastor, or even, I mean, largely with Ordinary Movement, we have just regular men and women who are trying to figure out, like, you know, how does this relate to me? So in your own words, how would you describe what that invitation is that's been largely absent?
Well, if I go back to the beginning of my life in ministry, there was in that time frame, there was a big push, you know, at least amongst youth ministries and other things. Hey, everybody's called. So, hey, whether you're going to be a business professional or a nurse or whatever the lane of your career path you might choose, everybody's called. And that's true as disciples of Christ. We are that, but I think we swung that pendulum so far to that direction. I don't know if we were very clear on, you could have a call of God on your life that you might be called to be, you know, a pastor, you know, an evangelist, a missionary. And I know I'm using those terms, but I mean, I think we took the fivefold gifts and maybe set them on the shelf for a little while. And it's time to pull them back off and say, no, there's a greater calling that's on your life. And so that's one of those things that's just been kind of one of those things gnawing in the back of my mind throughout my ministry is how are we issuing the call? Are we giving young men and women the opportunity to respond to the Lord and say, you know what, here I am, send me, Lord. I'm available. And we have an initiative in our movement called Called. It's just simply called Called. John Zick, he's the director of that. And he's helping lead that charge for our movement and bringing that back to the forefront, back to the young men and women that are in our camps during the summer, to youth conventions and conferences, to saying, wait a second, there could be a calling on your life. And what would that look like if you walked that out?
That's good. That's good. I love the invitation. One of the problems that we're solving is just getting people engaged in disciple making. Would you say that, like, most of the churches that I don't know. I mean, do you see the invitation just for even people to engage in disciple making, let alone, I mean, I know that you're saying that the invitation for people to even consider, like, ministry as a pastor or church leader has been absent. How would you say is the invitation and the health of the invitation for people to be invited to go beyond church going, like beyond attending, beyond giving, but to actually, like, disciple making? And maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit of, like, in your mind, what would that invitation look like?
Well, this is actually an area that I spend a lot of my time with our pastors across the country when I'm talking with them or doing some, like, you know, day training events and things like this. I think one way we overcomplicate discipleship, so we don't have a clear pathway because we overcomplicate it in that sense. But I do think it's a very relational journey. And it's the old adage, I'm sure you've heard it before. It's I do, you watch, we talk, you know,
The D square.
then you're right. So that whole thing, I've actually been going back and teaching that a lot
Yeah.
and going, take somebody with you to do ministry. Take somebody with you when you go and pray. Take somebody with you when you open up the Bible and you study it. And then even for people that might have a call of God on their life, take them with you when you do a hospital visitation. Take them with you when you do these different things. But I think too, even if we have churches that have walked that out, we tend to skip the we talk, you know? And that's where we talk about the why behind the what. That's where that's where the discipleship really happens, because that's where the relationship connection takes place. The trust is built. And we talk about, why are we even doing this? That makes the what more meaningful, powerful, palpable, that says, no, we're making an eternal impact here. And this is why.
Yeah.
So it's coming back to some of those basics and teaching that, pressing that in, and creating clear pathways. I mean, we're really great about talking about next steps. You know, hey, you have a first time guest, what's their next step? You know, but we need those next steps in taking them into a discipleship process and pathway.
Okay. No, I agree. Absolutely. So on the church planning, we'll say the church planning thought. Do church plants in general work?
Good question.
Because that's your objective is church planning,
Yes.
but do church planning, you know, and I think like, let me unload that more. I would suspect, and I mean, I have my own biased opinions, but I want to hear from you. Like, not just because someone has a heart to church plant doesn't mean that they're going to be effective at disciple making. And just because it's a church plant doesn't mean that it's going to make it and still be there 2 years later and have actually reached lost people. And so I'd love to hear from you a little bit, if we can remove the bias maybe from denomination or movement.
Sure.
But there are approaches to church planting that really are effective at reaching lost people, right? And then there's also like, are we just replicating the same thing that's already dying, but it's in a new building with new leadership? So I'd love to hear some thoughts on church planting a little bit.
I'll answer it this way. I think, I mean, the two markers of success. My counterpart, Mike McCrary, he works a lot with Ed Stetzer and other leaders from other denominations, especially on the academic side of this whole thing of church planting. And the two biggest markers for long-term success is assessments and training. And if they've been assessed and they're being trained well, and then some ongoing coaching, of course. But if those two things are happening well, we see a higher level of success within the CMN family. If we've assessed you and you've gone through our training, our success rate's just about 87%. You're still open 5 years after launch.
Wow.
The thing is like, if somebody's coming through, you know, I can't speak to everyone else, but I can speak for us, is when you come and develop a relationship with CMN, we assess you. We're assessing your church planning skills. Like, we're assessing, you know, this idea of what kind of grit do you have as a person, and what's your fortitude? Have you ever started anything before? You know, do you have that entrepreneurial bone in you to do that, create something from nothing? Can you lead? Have you developed, et cetera, et cetera? If we've assessed you and you go through our training, we're seeing a higher rate of success through those elements. At the end of the day, though, you've got to be able to take what we put on the table for you and help you go walk that out. Now, one of the differences with CMN is we don't teach one way. We give you principles, and then we help you contextualize those principles to where God's asked you to plant your church. So I'll give you an example. So if somebody comes to our training, we have facilitators or some of our top church planters from the platform are teaching the principles, but then we have a coach at your table that is then coaching that principle into your context with you to help you execute it for you. Because there's different styles, there's different models of churches, and it's not always, large box, attractional. There's other ways to do church.
Yeah.
And so we're leaning into the planter going, what's it God asked you to do? Now, here's best practices and principles we've learned along the journey. This is what we would encourage you to start walking out. And then we help them develop their plans. But I do think that church planting in general, there are some organizations that do an incredible job, but it's just, this is the only way they teach it. I think because of our movement, we're a voluntary cooperative fellowship as we are described. And in that, we voluntarily come together, and it means there's a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds that think it should be done in a lot of different ways. Okay. And so we have to bring a principle-based training that you could execute in about any context.
Okay. Do you see any attributes of the approaches that pretty much crush it at success rate?
I think there are some standard plays you can run. I think one of the things it's, if you're doing guest follow-up really well, if you're doing, if you're treating people very, maybe let me rephrase this. I think if I can break this down, if we start treating people transformationally in the process, we see a higher rate of success. When we treat them transactionally, like, hey, I just need you to come be my guest, and I need you to come then get into my pipeline, and I really just need you to fill a hole to serve on Sunday, so I make sure I've got a greeter at that door, or an usher on that aisle, or a musician on that stage. If we can pull back from transactional development and engagement with people, and we move into the transformational category where we're going, how has God created this person? Where do they fit in our church family? And how do we help them grow and to become what God's asked them to be? When we start thinking and asking those questions, we have a much higher rate of success.
This sounds like, on my end, it's like that's common sense. But I've also been on the other end of church plant training, and we can become so focused on systems and almost like a Salesforce machine with pipelines and lead generation and marketing and fill in the the volunteer spots. So I understand what you're saying, but someone listening, maybe contextually, they're like, why is that not common sense?
Well, I think yes, and I think it depends on your background. And I mean, there is a measure of taking some of the greatest tools that are out there right now and using them for your guest follow-up in your assimilation process. And, whether you're using Planning Center or something else that you're going to put something into, or you're going to use Tidely, or, there's all these tools that you can use. You can go and promote all you want in your community. You can do these different things, but at the end of the day, if the leader of each of those areas of responsibility isn't treating people transformationally, then people start feeling like a transaction real quickly, and they find the back door.
Yeah.
They don't stick around.
Hey friends, we're going to jump right back in the interview, but I want to take a moment and highlight ordinary movement. So let's say that you are the typical ordinary man, ordinary woman. You love Jesus, but you've never been discipled. You don't even know what a disciple is. You don't know where to start. You don't know if you could lead a group. Well, listen, we have made ordinary movement simple, scalable, highly reproducible, and we've taken all the guesswork out of discipleship and made it exactly for people like you. So you can come in. We have a training. It sets you up with everything you need to know about how to lead a group, how to launch a group. It walks you through the discipleship process. So you're not just getting information and telling people information. You're learning practices and how you actually work with people relationally and developmentally so that your group isn't just in a knowledge acquisition loop, but is actually growing spiritually, having deep, real conversations, and challenged in a healthy way because they love Jesus, to be multipliers, to be people who end up living a lifestyle of disciple making. And so check out ordinarymovement.com. You can learn about the men's track, the women's track, or our co-ed track, more about our discipleship process, all of our resources there. Also, if you're listening to this interview and you are a pastor and you recognize there is a void perhaps in your church in the disciple-making movement side, or the discipling culture, or perhaps you just want to see more results on disciple-making and less just religious routine and culture like that, then I want to invite you to check out ordinarymovement.com as well. Go to the church page. There you'll see all of our common questions that pastors often ask us. There's also a framework page where we introduce to you some of the best practices as far as introducing ordinary movement into your church. And let me just mention, this was not designed to be something that you have to lead, that you have to micromanage. It's simply something that you can integrate, that you can identify the right leaders with and ask them to run with it, have them go through the training, and then you're just championing this. You're celebrating the wins. And as a result, through ordinary people, you will see disciple making movement happen in and then through and then outside of your church, all because you handed it off and said, hey, run with this. And so we're in your corner. We'll do anything we can to support you, to pray with you, to coach you through this. And if you want to learn more about how Ordinary Movement can serve your church in creating disciple making movement there, go to ordinarymovement.com. All right, back to the interview.
So jumping back to the rural world, I know you've written a whole book about this, but I'd love to just open the floor for you to share your heart on this opportunity, because I think it's an under-discussed and lesser known issue. The lack of good disciple making churches and growing churches in rural areas. And also, I don't, like we talked about earlier, the invitation for people to step out and to lead in these areas. So can you take, a window here and just run with, like, why is this so important to you, and what is this opportunity all about?
I think the rural is an incredible space, as I mentioned before. I mean, I didn't just have the opportunity to pastor a congregation, but I had the opportunity to pastor a community. When you become the community's pastor, that's a privilege and an honor that's hard to explain. It carries a lot of weight with that, but a great amount of influence that God can use in significant ways. I do think people have equated small town to Mayberry, and in that case, everything's fine in Mayberry, but it's not. The drug problems are just as high. The divorce rates are just as big of a problem, all those different elements. But one of the most incredible things about a small town is the relational equity that if you take the time to build it, it can go very far. And I think that's why I tend to probably lean a little more into that transformational question versus transaction, because if you come in with an attractional, transactional model of church, you're not going to go far in a small town, because what wins the day is relationship, and relationships built on trust. And that takes time, that takes serving, that takes sitting down and over a cup of coffee and hearing somebody's story. And I do think we're in a place where God wants to do incredible things in small places. I think small town America is scrappy. I think they are hungry to experience something authentic. And if you're willing to go in and put in the hard work of developing relationships, you're going to pass the whole community. Not only that, but you won't find a lot of people that sign up to be a pastor and go, send me to the rural America. Excuse me, but it's just not sexy, right? It's not the cool place to go. And so what happens is in the rural context, it also forces us to really look at raising up the next generation, because who's going to have a passion for that town? The kid that was born and raised in that town.
Yeah.
I pastored in the town I grew up in. And I had the privilege to pastor the church that I gave my life to Jesus in. But out of that, God began to birth in us this incredible dream to, what if we spiritually owned our region and we went to the town down the road that doesn't have a life-giving church? Let's go put a church there. And that's what started our whole church planting journey.
Yeah.
Is we ended up doing that in a short succession and started planting. And you know what? Almost all of our leaders and pastors came out from within. They were not, we didn't hire them outside the church. These were second career people. These were young men and women that had been raised up in our church and our discipleship process and our leadership development. And what I love, if I could get back to the rural context, is where our future missionaries and pastors are coming from. Because small town America and small church, there are sending churches.
Yeah.
Our larger churches, and I'm thankful for every single one of them. But because they're growing at such a rate and they're at a such a size, they do keep their leaders, because they need to put them into their culture and develop that and do their ministries and all those things. But in a smaller context, when you start getting the cream of the crop rising to the surface, yeah, you can send them to the town down the road, but you're probably also going to send them around the world to be a missionary. That's what's so incredible about the context of a rural place. Has so much potential with sons and daughters, with men and women who are raising up in those spaces. And to pastor in that area, the only way you can do it is think transformationally, be relational, build trust, and think about the next generation.
So for some rising men and women who maybe are listening and they're either like on the outskirts of rural or they're in rural, maybe they're lacking the invitation from the leaders in their own churches. I'd be curious to know, like, what are some mindsets that people need to change if they're going to lead innovatively in a rural area and see growth again?
I think you have to first realize where you are. I think you have to have a reality check on where's the health of my church. Are we on the upswing? Are we on the downswing? Are we approaching, where the age of our church is over a certain age? We don't have any young families coming into our church. There's young families in these communities. The question is, are they walking through our doors of our church? And I think we have to have a real life assessment and going, really, where are we? And what am I willing to change for it? And that doesn't mean that you always got to you got to remodel the building. It doesn't mean that but you might have to change the way you're going to engage the community. I think we have the mentality sometimes that if we get into a place of unhealth, we're not thinking arrows out. We're not thinking, how do I serve the community? What is the community's needs? For us, when we went into the communities across Western South Dakota, we really focused in on the schools. Schools are the lifeblood of a community. So we'd find ways that we could serve the schools. Example was we had a school down the street from our church that we approached the principal, said, how can we serve you? And in that conversation, of course, they're looking for what's the strings attached. And we're like, hey, we're not here to proselytize. We're just here to serve. And through that relationship, we discovered, well, they had kids that didn't have good test scores because they weren't having good attendance. So we partnered, we dreamed up with the principal. We said, what if our church bought a brand new bicycle for every kid that had perfect attendance? Well, we did that the first year, 6 kids, then it doubled the next, then it doubled, then it tripled. And we were buying bikes we're buying 80 plus bikes a year. And now we're buying iPads for the kids that are now having great attendance for year 2 and 3. And, and their test scores went up because their attendance went up. And because of that trust that we built, we could just walk into that school anytime we wanted and serve any way possible. And because we cared about the community school and we cared about those kids, those families started going, I want to know what else that church has to offer.
Yeah.
And when we start thinking and creatively about what is it, and we didn't do that in every town, but we did it for that school, and every school had a different need. But what are we doing to go into our communities and serve them without strings attached? But eventually somebody takes notice and says, I want to see what else you have to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think a lot of churches are stuck in thinking that like people know that they're a church because they meet on Sundays. I don't know. I don't know that there's like a thought process anymore. They just meet on Sundays and they hope people will come. And yet people have just felt like the church is totally like it does not relate to their normal everyday life anymore. And I have a hard time thinking of what would I think if I grew up unchurched, or only went like one time for Christmas, with my grandma. But I do recognize, and I'm aware Gen Z is very concerned about it. The data shows anyway, of how does church really impact their community? How does it really show the love of Jesus in their community? And just inviting people to church and people knowing that there's a church on Sundays, like that doesn't cut it anymore.
I had it's a little town that we had a church in called Edgemont, South Dakota. Town of about 700. And we did a back to school event. We gave away backpacks full of supplies for school, all this stuff. And a rancher who was a well-known rancher in the area showed up. And they ended up coming to our church, and they said, we want to make this church our home because it's the first time somebody hasn't asked us for something. It's the first time somebody actually gave my kids something and wanted to help my kids. And just serving people in a creative fashion, especially in a small town, word gets around fast.
Yeah.
It can open up some incredible doors for people to start saying, you know what, I want to know the Jesus you know. I want to know the God you know. I want to come worship with you.
Yeah. No, that's good. So then I would think that there's a lot of people where they're in towns in rural areas where there's great opportunity. They can see there's not a thriving, growing church where people are excited. People are growing in their relationship with Jesus. They're seeing people saved, all the things that you'd want to see. But then they're like, I can't go to Bible school. And they're maybe they feel like they've kind of like missed that bus. I don't know, they now run the family farm, or they're a lineman, whatever the case is, rural wise. But like, speak to that person. Did they miss the bus? Is this opportunity for somebody else? And or do they need to do all of that traditional stuff to actually be a church planter, or to see a movement of disciple making in their community?
It's a good question. I would say they haven't missed the bus. The reality is I think there's incredible men and women that, whether they're halfway through the current career of their life, or they're, or halfway through life right now, they've got incredible life experience that they can bring to the table. And I think churches, if they're willing to go through the work of creating a pathway and a process to develop and train them, not just in the I do, you watch, we talk kind of thing, but it's the idea of, let me give you some real education. There are pathways, there are mechanisms, there are systems out there that can help with that. I mean, within the Assemblies of God, we have it in every district and network. There is a system and a process to help somebody go, you know what, I think I might have a call of God in my life, and I really want to help people more than what I'm helping now, beyond just a volunteer that serves, in my church, but I want to maybe lead a church or plant a church. We have systems to do that. We have, that will help you learn some education, learn about the Bible, understand the New and Old Testament, understand, church history, all the things that it takes to start building your knowledge so that you can maybe even become somebody that can preach or write a message or, run something of greater depth. There are ways to do it. Yeah. There's a lot of churches that, if they will go through the work, there's people and places you can partner with to even make those things happen. We had a leadership academy in our church that we developed to raise up our own leaders in-house across all of our campuses. And it works. And you don't have to go to Bible college to end up becoming a pastor.
Yeah. On the thought of, like, a lot of people assume you got to go to Bible college. So you're saying you don't. Do they have to quit their day job? I mean, maybe they, like we talked about, like they run the family business or something, and this person's like, they have that grit, that entrepreneurial take. Like, they could plant something, they could see something thrive, but they're just thinking like, hey, I can't drop it all to be a pastor. And maybe God is leading them to do it, and that's an act of surrender. But I think you would say differently, that today where there's room to really rethink what it means to lead in ministry. So can you speak to kind of the co-vocational, the bivocational, the people who are still running their businesses, but also leading these movements?
Yeah, I just, let me speak from my own personal experience in the sense of, so all of our campus pastors at our church in Western South Dakota were all co-vocational. They all worked another job, and then they were, basically did part-time for the church as the campus pastor, pastoring that community. Yeah. We had one of them was the principal of the high school. Wow. And the pastor of our church. Another one was assistant football coach at the high school and the pastor. One manager at Stanley Steamer. There are different people like that. For me, although I didn't have to from a financial need, I did it because I wanted to be integrated in my community and I wanted to win the lost to the Lord. So I was a part-time sheriff's deputy. And if you couldn't tell by the mustache, but it's one of those things where I loved serving in that capacity. And it started out as a chaplain and evolved into, I could arrest you and I could pray for you. But it was one of those things that I did for 8 years that I had so much fun. And I got to lead a lot of deputies to the Lord over that season of my life, because when you're in the good, the bad, and the ugly with people, man, it just, you just be Jesus with skin on, so to speak, and it just makes a difference. And so I didn't ask my pastors to do something I wasn't willing to do. So I loved every minute of that season of my life being co-vocational.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, we're about to wrap it up here, but let me just open up the floor for anything else. Like, what is something related to what we've been talking about that is on your heart that you feel like is under discussed, and as a message that you would want to throw out there to anyone listening?
I think that God is looking for some men and women who will tune their ear to his voice that will say, Lord, here I am. Would you send me? And I think that if we will do that and we will slow down and just have the guts to ask God that question, I think he wants to tap more people on the shoulder than we realize to answer the call. Whether that's a full-time position in ministry or that's co-vocational or it's a volunteer, I do think that God is looking for some men and women that have the guts to make his name known. I do think that whether it's a small context or a large context, I also think God is looking for us to ask God that question and be willing to listen to his response, because he's going to ask us to do something bigger than we can do in ourselves. I think right now we're in a season where the church has the opportunity to show off who God is. But that takes us having the courage to ask some bold questions and be willing to be obedient to the answer to those questions. And whether it's planting churches in a rural context or going multi-site or moving to a town that you've never been in before and learning the culture of that community so that you can start a new work and a new ministry, I think God's just looking for some men and women to do that. So I would just challenge whoever's listening and watching, have the guts to ask the question, have the guts to look to the Lord and say, here I am, send me.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I realize that I kind of set you up like we were in the last one, but I think there's a lot of people who see it, but like they feel afraid to bring it up. Almost a sense of like, so I'll give you an example. I was talking to a friend the other day. He knows his church is not healthy. He knows that like the church planting vision is not there. The disciple making vision is not there. And really feels afraid to bring it up to the lead pastor because it would hurt his lead pastor's feelings to say like, hey, like it really comes down to lead pastor's vision and leadership. And I think anyone listening would know if their lead pastor has a vision to really see disciple making and to see church planting and reach the lost. And are they actively working at it? Are they raising up leaders? Or if they're listening, they would know like, yeah, that doesn't exist at our church. And they can kind of slowly see, like you said, the young families are gone. It's one service, it's dying, and yet there's a community full of people. What would you say to the person that sees this and maybe their lead pastor doesn't have thick enough skin to hear the feedback or they could go to that person and trust that person would actually want to raise them up and help them become a leader?
I think if you're encountering a leader that doesn't have thick skin, then you've got to think about how can you become an asset to them. And if they're in the seat still, you've got to assume at this point that they're still the Lord's anointed for this season. And so in that, you have to put yourself in the right mindset before you approach. And if you can get to a place where you believe, listen, the Lord still has them in the seat, in this place of leadership, so I need to respect that. So then I would come in and as becoming an asset would say, listen, this is an area that I see could be a deficit for us. Could I be the solution to that? And could I do this, or this to help in this area? I think it's one thing when you say, hey, pastor, you're not doing this and we need to do this, which pastors get that all the time. Pastor, I think we should be doing this, but no, that person never wants to be the solution. So I think if you can come and say, this is a deficit I see, but I really think that I could help with this area in doing A, B, or C, and then sit back and see what the pastor says. Give them the opportunity to say, yeah, I'll let you do that. Go for it. Yeah. Take their blessing and go and become the influencer.
Yeah. No, it's good. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of pastors also just feel stuck by old traditional expectations that their elder board, deacon board has of them to do everything and to do all the ministry, and possibly coming to that pastor and saying, hey, can I also do this with you, would be a game changer for them.
It would change it in a heartbeat. Absolutely.
It's good. All right, Gerad, thank you for your time. Thank you for all the wisdom that you shared. And just even helping understand better this invitation that we have to do church planting, to disciple making, the need in rural areas. I'm really grateful for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for the privilege. And if we can help any of your listeners, churchmultiplication.net, we'd love to help serve you guys and help train.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Gerad.
Okay. All right. Take care.
All right. Bye. All right. I hope you enjoyed this interview. We have another one right here.
Also, if you missed it, check out the State of the Church introduction video right over here. And be sure to go to ordinarymovement.com to learn all about our platform, our discipleship process, our framework, all the resources and the coaching that we provide to help anyone go from churchgoer to disciple who makes disciples. See you there.